My name is Adam. I'm 28 years old, and when I arrived in Florence, I carried with me only a backpack, a tired mind, and the desperate need to escape everything familiar. The city greeted me with its soft evening light, cobblestone streets that whispered history under my shoes, and the faint aroma of roasted coffee drifting through the air. I had booked a room in a small, old hotel that seemed frozen in time. Its narrow staircase creaked as I carried my bag up to the third floor. When I finally entered my room, I found it modest, almost bare, but charming in its simplicity. The most important detail was the tiny balcony, an iron railing slightly rusted with age, looking out onto a quiet, narrow street where shadows fell long between the buildings. That balcony felt like a secret waiting to be uncovered. I leaned on the railing, inhaling the cool air of the Florentine night. My chest felt lighter, my thoughts slower. For the first time in months, I believed I might actually rest. But then she appeared. Across the street, another balcony opened its shutters, and a young woman stepped into the glow of a yellowed lamp. She wore a pale dress that swayed gently in the breeze, and in her hand, she held a glass of red wine. Her presence was effortless, like a painting that suddenly came to life. When her eyes found mine, she didn't turn away. She smiled. That smile, simple, unguarded, struck me with the force of something I couldn't explain. And in that moment, I realized my sleepless night was only beginning. I stayed frozen on my balcony, half hidden by the shadows, not knowing what to do. Her gaze lingered on me, playful yet calm, as if she had already decided something while I was still catching up. Then, slowly, she raised her glass of wine toward me, tilting it in a gesture that was both casual and intimate, an unspoken invitation. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. The only thing I had near me was a plastic bottle of water, but I lifted it anyway, pretending it was a fine vintage. For a second, it felt absurd, ridiculous even. But her laughter floated across the narrow street in response, warm and real, and the absurdity became something magical. For minutes, maybe longer, we said nothing. The silence wasn't heavy. It was alive, stretched thin like a thread between our balconies. Every time our eyes met, I felt the world around us blur into the background. The soft hum of distant traffic, the muffled chatter from a bar down the street, the faint ringing of a bicycle bell somewhere in the maze of Florence's alleys. None of it mattered. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that I was projecting meaning into a simple exchange between strangers. But then, she tilted her head, smiled again, and mouthed something I couldn't hear. She set down her glass, disappeared inside for a heartbeat, and when she returned, she leaned over her balcony railing and whispered just loud enough, "Wait for me." And in that instant, I knew this night would not end with us standing on separate balconies. I didn't have time to second-guess what she meant. A few minutes later, I heard the faint creak of a door below, the hurried rhythm of footsteps on stone, and then, there she was. She crossed the narrow Florentine street barefoot, her pale dress brushing against her knees, one hand holding a half-empty bottle of wine. I stood on my balcony, breath caught somewhere in my chest, watching her as if I weren't sure she was real. When she reached my building, she looked up, her eyes searching for mine, and smiled with a mischievous certainty, as though this had been inevitable all along. Moments later, the knock came at my door. A quiet, almost tentative sound, yet it carried through the stillness of the old hotel. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I opened it, and there she was, closer than before, impossibly closer. "May I?" she asked softly, though her tone suggested she already belonged here. I stepped aside. She entered without hesitation, bringing with her a subtle fragrance of jasmine and wine. The dim light from the hallway fell across her face, and for the first time, I noticed the smallest details, the curve of her lips, the way her hair framed her cheekbones, the sparkle in her eyes that seemed to know too much. We carried the bottle out to my balcony, and soon we were sitting side by side on the old metal chairs. The street below was silent now, wrapped in shadows. Florence slept, but for us, the night had only just begun. The bottle of wine between us was more than just a drink. It felt like a bridge, something fragile that connected two strangers across the vastness of our separate lives. She poured slowly, her fingers steady, and I noticed how the light from the street lamp caught in the dark liquid, turning it into something richer, deeper, almost glowing. She handed me a glass, her hand brushing against mine for a moment too long. That small contact was enough to send a spark racing through my skin, making me painfully aware of the silence that followed. I wondered if she felt it too, or if it was just me, too starved for connection, too easily enchanted by the setting. Her laugh broke the stillness. Not loud, but soft like something private, meant only for me. "You looked so serious over there," she teased, tilting her head toward her balcony across the street, like a traveler lost in his own thoughts. "And you," I said, finding my courage, appeared like a painting I wasn't ready for. Her eyes flickered, amused yet touched, and she raised her glass again. We drank, and then the words began to flow, slowly at first, but with growing ease. We spoke about Florence, about the way the city seemed timeless at night, about art that lingered in museums like memories trapped on canvas. She told me her name, but even now I hesitate to write it, as if putting it into letters might steal something from that night. Between the stories and laughter, there were silences. Not awkward ones, but charged, filled with the weight of unspoken things. Every pause made me notice her more. The way her hair sometimes fell forward when she leaned closer, the faint trace of perfume mixed with wine, the warmth of her presence beside me. At one point, a gust of night air swept across the balcony, and her shoulder brushed mine. Neither of us moved away. It was such a small gesture, yet it made my heart race in a way no words could. The city below was forgotten. The world beyond the balcony ceased to exist. There was only her, me, and the invisible thread pulling us closer, tighter, with every passing minute. That night, I understood something. Intimacy isn't always built over months or years. Sometimes it arrives like lightning, sudden and overwhelming, burning itself into your memory so fiercely you know it will never fade. And as her laughter softened into quiet, as her head leaned ever so slightly toward my shoulder, I realized I didn't want the night to end. The night deepened, and Florence seemed to fall into a deeper sleep, the city's sounds fading one by one. Even the street below us had become silent, as if it knew to leave us alone. The only things left were the faint hum of a distant scooter, the occasional rustle of leaves in the alleyway, and the quiet rhythm of our breathing on that balcony. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the railing, staring out at the sliver of sky visible between the rooftops. The lamplight made her look unreal, half shadow, half gold. I wanted to memorize her face, every line of it, as if I were afraid she might vanish if I looked away. "You know," she began softly, her voice carrying just above a whisper, "this city has always felt to me like a dream. Every time I walk through it, I think, perhaps I'm not awake at all." Her words struck me, because they echoed exactly what I had been feeling since her first smile across the balconies. I swallowed, trying to find the right reply, but she turned suddenly, meeting my eyes. "And tonight," she continued, "it feels even more like a dream than ever before." I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say? That I felt the same? That the moment she appeared, my night became something I never wanted to end? Instead, I just nodded, my silence heavier than any confession. She must have seen the truth in my expression, though, because her lips curved into the faintest smile. She set her glass down and, almost absent-mindedly, reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm, delicate, yet firm enough to erase any doubt that this was intentional. Time seemed to stretch thin. The world outside the balcony, the past, the future, even the city itself, disappeared. "This doesn't need to last forever," she whispered, her eyes still locked on mine. "But tonight, let's not hold anything back." The honesty of it, the naked clarity, made my chest tighten. For once in my life, I didn't want to think, didn't want to plan, didn't want to guard myself with caution. For once, I wanted to step straight into the dream, no matter how brief. I squeezed her hand gently, and without realizing it, I smiled. Not the careful, polite smile I gave strangers, but one that felt like surrender. That was the moment I knew I had already crossed a line. We must have sat there for hours, though time had lost all meaning. The wine bottle grew lighter, the glasses emptier, and yet the air between us only grew heavier, filled with something unspoken. Every small gesture, a laugh that ended too close to my ear, the brush of her sleeve against my arm, the way her eyes lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, pulled me further into the spell of the night. Below us, Florence seemed deserted. Even the last voices of passers-by had faded into silence. The city that hours ago overflowed with tourists and noise was now nothing more than ancient stone, sleeping domes, and shadows. For a moment, it felt as though the world had been erased, leaving only this balcony suspended in air and the two of us clinging to it. She leaned back, stretching her legs, her pale dress spilling across the iron chair. "Tell me something," she said suddenly, her voice soft but serious. "Why are you here? In Florence? Alone?" The question startled me, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wasn't used to speaking the truth so plainly. I stared at my glass for a moment, the wine catching the lamplight. Then I said quietly, "To escape. From work. From everything. I needed to be somewhere where I wasn't expected to be anyone." Her eyes softened, and she tilted her head. "So you came here to disappear?" "Maybe," I admitted. "And yet, I think I was meant to find something instead. Or someone." For the first time that night, silence didn't feel light. It pressed against us, heavy with meaning neither of us dared to say out loud. I thought I'd gone too far, revealed too much, but then she leaned closer, so close I could smell the faint trace of jasmine again. "I know what you mean," she whispered. "I didn't expect tonight either. But here we are." Her words trembled slightly, though her gaze never left mine. And in that moment, I realized the dream had become too real to dismiss. She placed her hand on my arm. Not a playful touch, not an accident, but something steady, anchoring. My heart hammered against my ribs, the sound filling my ears louder than the quiet city. The night had stopped being simply magical. It had become dangerous, because I knew when morning came, reality would demand its price. But I didn't care. Not yet. At some point, the wine was gone. The bottle lay on its side at our feet, forgotten, yet neither of us moved to put it away. The night had settled around us like a velvet curtain, and every word, every glance felt sharper against its stillness. She had shifted closer, so close, in fact, that the warmth of her bare arm pressed lightly against mine, and the occasional brush of her hair across my shoulder made it impossible to think of anything else. I remember my breath, uneven, unsteady, and how carefully I tried to mask it, though I suspected she could hear. We talked less now. Our words had dwindled into fragments, half-finished thoughts, as though language itself was no longer capable of carrying what passed between us. She spoke of music she loved, of paintings that made her cry, of places she wanted to see before she was old. I listened, but more than her words, I listened to the way her voice shifted, low and gentle, almost daring me to lean closer. At one point, she paused mid-sentence, turned, and studied me in silence. Her eyes were darker now, reflecting the faint glow of the street lamp. "You're not like the others," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I don't know why, but I feel as if I've known you longer than tonight." I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my chest too tight. So instead, I let my hand rest on the cold railing between us. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she placed her hand over mine. The weight of it was slight, but the meaning was heavy enough to anchor me to the moment forever. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, soft, faint, announcing an hour too late to still be night, too early to be morning. I realized then that dawn wasn't far. The sky above the rooftops had begun to shift, losing some of its deep black, taking on the faintest shade of blue. Her eyes flicked upward, noticing it too. A small sigh escaped her lips. "The night is shorter than I wanted," she murmured, almost as if she were blaming the sky itself. I turned to her fully then, heart pounding, knowing that the night we had shared could not stretch much longer. Every second was slipping away, and the thought of it ending filled me with something close to panic. And yet, strangely, there was no regret in her face, only acceptance, as if she had always known our time together was borrowed. Still, she smiled at me, soft, wistful, and impossibly tender. "Let's not waste what's left." Her words echoed inside me like a vow. The sky above Florence was already softening, the first hints of dawn brushing pale blue against the black. I could see it reflected in her eyes as she leaned against the railing, her hair loose and wild from the night breeze. For a moment, I wanted to freeze time, to hold the world still, to keep the sky dark so that this fragile space between us wouldn't collapse under the weight of morning. She must have felt my hesitation, because she turned to me with a smile that was half reassurance, half challenge. "Don't think about the morning," she whispered. "It isn't here yet." And then she leaned in, closing the distance with a slowness that felt deliberate, as if daring me to turn away. I didn't. My breath caught, the air between us heavy with the taste of wine, the faint trace of jasmine, and the quiet hunger neither of us had tried to name. When her lips finally touched mine, it was like stepping off the edge of something terrifying, exhilarating, inevitable. The city around us disappeared. There were no bells, no footsteps, no waking noises of Florence. Only the press of her mouth, the warmth of her body shifting closer, and the undeniable truth that this was no longer just a fleeting encounter. It was something deeper, even if it had no place beyond the walls of the night. She pulled back for a second, her forehead resting against mine. "This is madness," she murmured with a breathless laugh. "We don't even know each other. Maybe we don't need to," I said before I could stop myself. The words came out raw, too honest, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled again, eyes shining in the faint glow of the street lamp. We didn't return to our chairs. Instead, we stayed there on the balcony floor, legs tangled, hands searching for one another in the quiet. We spoke less and less, until words gave way to silence, and silence gave way to closeness. Every glance, every touch carried the weight of urgency, as though we both knew that the sunrise would dissolve it all, scattering us back into separate worlds. And yet, in those last hours, none of it mattered. There was only us. The city was waking. Somewhere, a window shutter creaked open. A pigeon beat its wings across the rooftops. The night was ending, and still we clung to it, as if we could wrestle a few more moments from the grip of time. Her hand slid into mine one last time, and she whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear. "Promise me you'll remember this." And I knew I would. Always. When the sun finally rose, it came gently, first as a faint shimmer over the rooftops, then as a soft flood of light that crept into every shadow of the narrow street below. The golden warmth touched the iron railing of the balcony, the folds of her dress, the curve of her cheek. For a second, I almost believed she belonged to the morning as much as she had belonged to the night. But then she stood, slowly, reluctantly, like someone waking from a dream she wished could last a little longer. She stretched, gathering herself, her eyes drifting toward the balcony across the street, the place where it had all begun. "I have to go," she said quietly, and the words cut sharper than I expected. I sat frozen, unwilling to accept the sudden shift. The night had felt endless, infinite, and now reality was rushing in like an uninvited guest. "Go where?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer was somewhere I couldn't follow. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she walked back inside for a moment, returning with a small folded napkin in her hand. She placed it gently into mine, her fingers lingering as if to steady the weight of something far larger than paper. When I unfolded it, I saw a small heart drawn in pen, and beneath it, a single line written in delicate handwriting. "Not all dreams are meant to last forever, but some stay with you always." My chest tightened as I read it. I wanted to protest, to tell her not to leave, to fight the inevitability of this morning. But when I looked up, She was already smiling, soft, almost bittersweet. A smile that said she had made peace with what I couldn't. She leaned in, pressed a light kiss against my cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for the night." Then, without giving me time to stop her, she turned and walked out through my door, her footsteps fading down the old wooden staircase. A moment later, I heard the creak of the door to the street below, and then silence. I rushed to the balcony, leaning over the railing, but she was gone. Only the waking city greeted me. The vendors setting up their stalls, the distant roll of a delivery cart, the swirl of pigeons in the sky. Florence was alive again, ordinary again. But I wasn't the same. I stood there for a long time, the napkin trembling in my hand, the words burned into me as though they were carved in stone. And in that moment, I knew, some dreams don't end when you wake. It has been months since that night in Florence, yet it lingers with me as vividly as if it happened yesterday. I've traveled since then, returned to my routine, sat at desks and stared at screens, walked through crowded streets where no one knew my name. And still, whenever the world feels heavy, my mind drifts back to that balcony. I can see it even now. The chipped iron railing, the narrow street asleep beneath us, the yellow glow of the lamp that turned her into something unearthly. I can hear her laughter, soft and fragile, like a secret meant for only me. I can still feel the warmth of her hand pressed into mine, the taste of red wine mixing with night air, the weight of her last words. People often ask what Florence was like. They expect stories about the Duomo, the Uffizi, the Arno at sunset. I nod, I smile, I mention the beauty of the city. But I never tell them the truth, that Florence, to me, will always be her. Not the statues, not the art, not the cobblestones, just one fleeting night, one impossible connection, and the silence of dawn when she walked away. Sometimes I wonder if I should have followed her, if I should have asked her name again, demanded more than a napkin and a memory. But deep down, I know that doing so might have broken the spell. Some things are not meant to be held too tightly. They lose their shape, their beauty, when forced into permanence. And so I carry her as she asked me to, in memory. A dream that ended but never faded. A reminder that life is not measured only by the years we live or the places we see, but by the moments that change us, however brief. I still keep the napkin folded in my journal. The ink has smudged a little, the heart looks faint, but the words remain clear. Not all dreams are meant to last forever, but some stay with you always. And she was right, because even now, every time I close my eyes, I can still feel Florence breathing against my skin.